My name's Glyn Pooley and I'd like to talk about art. This time my subject is...
Okay, so we're having a look at the work of Henri Matisse tonight. As you can see, he's born in 1869 till 1954. He came to prominence in the early part of the 20th century. This is one of his earlier paintings. I thought I'd put this in so it gives a bit of context to the work that he's known for. He was influenced by, firstly, the Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists, and we'll see those Post-Impressionist influences start to come through. There's an element, a tiny bit element of that Gauguin-esque kind of design quality seeping through in this, but he was also a fan of Edouard Manet, of course, one of the contemporaries of the Impressionists, but more older style, more conservative salon style. So he had an academic training in Paris. He originally trained as a lawyer. His father wanted him to be a lawyer, but he didn't find that particularly interesting, and then moved over into the arts. But he came from quite a prosperous family, and he was quite well connected early on. But he was in Paris at that time when it just really took off. The Montmartre scene started to come together, and all those artists, those post-impressionist artists, were all gathered around the same area. So this inspired his work. What you'll also see in his work as well, remember we looked at the Scottish colourists, you'll see real overlaps, how much they took from Matisse' way of painting. So he left the more academic tradition, as you can see here. Beautiful composition and design. Remember I talk about space in a picture, so you can see this bottom right hand corner, there's plenty of space with hints of colour connections, the blues and the ochres, which are also in the still life objects. This creates compositional balance in a picture. But then you jump to a picture like this, which is where he's become more known, his artwork developed into the more avant-garde style. This work is inspired by, we have mentioned the post-impressionists, so people like Signac, another French painter, who developed this painting technique where colours mix in the eye, placed side by side, also known as pointillism, and they add an incredible vibrancy. So you get points of coloured light sitting side by side, and that lifts your impression of a scene. It also lets the light of the canvas shine through in this case, and creates a vibration, which the artist was after at this particular time. He also spent time and summers down in the south of France, and he got to know a painter called Duran as well, and they got together and developed this movement that we're also familiar with, some of us, called the Fauvist movement, which literally means the wild beasts. So this picture of luxury, calm, and voluptuousness or pleasure is inspiration here. He was obviously having a good time, feeling good, and he's tried to capture a little bit of that. Two motifs for Matisse are the figure, the female figure often, and sometimes his wife, but other models, and still lifes and interiors. Those are the kind of quite conservative, traditional subjects that he would use as his inspiration for his work. And you'll see those kind of themes repeating. Although he does become quite innovative in his use of design and colour. The joy of life is continued here. There was a kind of movement in the early part of the 20th century that was celebrating more of a, sort of human strength and vitality. There was a positivity, and he's trying to emulate that in this work. There's elements in it, of course, which are taken from traditional art, Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden, paradise and things like that. But in the background, you start to see this motif of the dance there. And he becomes famous for that motif, as we'll see in the next couple of slides, because it shows this invigorating energy, which is linked up to the artist's fascination with the art of the primitive. You know, France being a colonizing country, went over to places like Africa, and the people that came back brought artifacts which artists found particularly fascinating. Sometimes masks, sometimes wooden objects, but there was something about the power force that they saw in them that inspired their art. So this primitivism, if you like, nothing primitive about it in terms of the force of the art, started to inspire people like Matisse, Andre Derain, and other artists at this particular time. So he's using these kind of motifs that he saw, he's using the imagery that he saw and the kind of objects that were brought back from Africa, and he's blending them all into this lifestyle that he's experiencing in the south of France. And all those things are starting to coalesce. And then this is quite a famous picture, very early now for the Fauvist movement, where he gets particularly interested in colour for colour's sake. So you see that he's kind of made an artwork that is without linear, there's no lines drawing around, demarking the subject. It's about the placing of the colours side by side. So it's trying to understand, for example, we talk in the basic terms how certain colours recede and other colours come towards us. But he's almost trying to understand colour from a kind of a spiritual dimension, yes, because that was something which was talked about a lot at this particular time in the art culture, but also trying to use colour in a kind of sculptural way, to try and use colour to create three-dimensional form by placing one colour against the next colour. Also working on the colour theories that were the post-impressionists brought to the table, whereby how you to enhance certain colours. Obviously, the simplest form is the complementaries, you know, the reds, for example, with elements of greens, but it's getting that balance just right. So he's experimenting with this. And rather than using flat area colours, which artists were using, people like Gauguin, he uses this broken mark, this soft broken mark, and makes up the picture almost like as if there's a series of clouds, cloud forms of paint. These then have a softer edge and they blend into each other a little bit more efficiently. But he's using here what you could call high resonance colours, the turquoises, pinks and things like that. They have a high frequency as we receive them on the eye, and he's playing around with these and he's experimenting with these kind of forms. Another famous picture of his wife. Here, the combination of what we just talked about in terms of colour choice and the monumental influence of primitivism, those solid wooden sculptures that you would have seen that have been brought back from Africa, etc., have started to inspire this work. Also, around about this time, 1905, 1906, he is in Paris and he meets Picasso. So they start discussing art and form, and you know, Picasso was particularly interested in certain similar things at the time, particularly the monumental primitive power of art. And although Picasso maybe is more working from his imagination as he develops his career, Matisse kind of takes on the life force of the image, but experiments with colors' decorative quality. And this is probably one of the reasons why Matisse became so popular. He was interested in design and he was interested in color in a way that can kind of uplift the spirit and uplift the soul. A contemporary artist, which you could say works along those same themes and you know, and is particularly interested by these same themes, is somebody like Hockney. He, as you know, is known for his color in his painting, but he's using the same language that Matisse was using here. So for your own paintings, if you can kind of Look at the kind of colours that he was using, seeing how they complement each other, and observe the soft art edges of them, and experiment with colour resonances. Maybe it could be how it makes you feel, or how you think it might stimulate your eye to kind of elevate yourself in some way. But just look at the combinations. The other thing as well is he started to develop a full contrast range, and he moved to even towards black. Now, as you know, or because some of you might know or might remember, Van Gogh used black. Van Gogh, of course, used very colourful paintings, but he used black to outline things sometimes. There was a movement called Cloyidism in France, of course, which kind of emphasized that. It's not dissimilar to stained glass windows. Bright light is coming through them, and they edge that bright light to enable one area to move from your eye to move from one area of color to another area of color. The light that comes through is the emanation. Now, that emanational force is what interests Matisse. And later on in his life, Matisse did design a whole chapel for that reason, with stained glass windows in it, strong design patterns. And if you go to the south of France, places like Nice, where he eventually moved to, just outside Nice, you will see evidence of that. This is an example this time, Blue Nude, 1907. As I mentioned Picasso a little bit earlier, you can see the overlaps here. That Demoiselle d'Avignon, which of course was Picasso's breakthrough picture, has got very similar structure in the way the nude is painted, as has Gauguin. There's a kind of solidity about the structure here. These kind of works were, as we could say, avant-garde at the time, and it's ironic, when this picture was taken over to America, there was a famous show over there in the 1920s where they introduced Impressionism and post-Impressionist art to the American audience. This painting took a high amount of flack, so much so they copied it onto an effigy and they burnt it. The Americans were not happy with it. They didn't see it as, art of particular value. Which is ironic, really, because as time went on, there's almost more American and Impressionist paintings over there than there is in Europe. But anyway, as breakthrough artists, and they're kind of giving people the opportunity to become familiar with a particular language. If you can tell a truth in any way, shape, or form, if it's deeply rooted in ancient cultures, and you can bring a bit of that into your art, eventually the audience will take it on board. Might take a while, but it's always possible. So this is interesting as well, because you can see the kind of curvilinear quality which starts to form in his artwork. Remember when we looked at Glasgow School, the Scottish colorist Ferguson, people like that, he liked to use curvilinear forms. He brought them from the Celtic tradition, which is another ancient tradition. These artists are taking it from certain African primitive tradition. It's interesting to see the overlaps. If you can coalesce these overlaps in your own work, it becomes more and more powerful. It's just learning the international language of painting, basically. And you've got another lovely one, another portrait of his wife. He becomes interested in the art of North Africa as well. So he goes over to places like Morocco and Tunisia, and he starts to study the decorational forms. He was particularly interested in the design aspect of things now, and the flattening of colour. These kind of elements, they lend themselves to colour being the main concentration. Later on, we'll see this turns into pure colour and into pure shapes. So you can see those themes coming through in this. It's a traditional portrait in terms of three-quarter length portrait. The face is taken from the dark, almost like mask-like quality, but there's a deep insight that's being portrayed. So it's deceptively simple in the design of the face there. Beautiful designs all over the dress, as I said, taken from North African Morocco designs. And now a relationship with the colour blue. Blue for blue's sake, if you like, to see getting the right kind of tone, the right colour blue to suggest something metaphysical. It's almost to try and suggest a feeling. And you'll see this starts to take hold for him. So in this picture, the dessert or harmony in red, the red room, this painting was, I think I recall, it was commissioned by quite an established collector in Russia. And that's why a number of these pictures from this period are still in the Hermitage in was it Petersburg? Not 100% sure there. And this picture was originally painted blue, but these were large paintings, and the commissioner wanted something about it. They ended up turning them red. We can draw our own conclusions sometimes, maybe, about that, but he was all interested about the study of red in this case and its relationship with blue. It's an unusual tone of red. As I said, he's trying to just say something which operates on a number of different levels. It's not, for example, the red of a wallpaper or the red of a tablecloth, because they're simultaneous, they're the same. So it's something to do with the feeling of the room. And the feeling of that red in relation to the green, which we suggest very simply, although it's pure design, is through a window. So it's got a kind of resonance between those two forms. This curvilinear design and shape element, which we just mentioned, runs through it. The flow runs through it as well. But we never move totally into abstraction. We are still delineated in terms of a room, a chair, a window, a person. These are motifs that he constantly adheres to. We get a full range of tones with the light on the figure and their face there, but it's beautiful the way he uses that similar colour, that off yellow colour, to echo the fruit on the table, which moves our eye across the composition beautifully. He also, with the way he's painted the objects on the table, he's given them a certain element of three-dimensional quality or perspective. He's manipulated it slightly, but they do seem to sit in space. But then when you look at the designs, the blue designs, they don't adhere to the same perspective. They're just pure decoration on a two-dimensional form. So they run from one area to the other area. So he's playing around with certain kinds of, if you like, perspectral way of manipulating space. And when we think about this as 1908, like we just talked about, the combination and the connection with Picasso and Cubism. And Cubism, of course, was looking at how an artist transfers three-dimensional space, gives the viewer an opportunity to explore it on many dimensions simultaneously. So Matisse, in a way, is kind of playing around with similar kinds of things. This looks it looks beautiful, it looks decorative in the design. Some of these are large, but you can imagine at the time that they would still be seen as, avant-garde, but challenging, as serious works of art, for most of the establishment. Because we're not that, it's only 1908, we're not that far away from the Salon in Paris with all its traditional ideas being the demarcator of taste. So it's interesting to see what he's doing in context of time there. And then he makes this picture, the dance, and this is the first version. He does a blue version and then he does a red version. As I said, with the dessert you just looked at, that was started off as a blue version. He's got these combinations, as we said, of the primitive form, the movement, the sense of joy, the sense of monumentality. These are large works as well, maybe 6 or 7 foot across, 4 or 5 foot high. So he's got to create this amazing flow of form, this idea of the movement, but in just a couple of colours, that blue and that green, he's almost trying to suggest the sky or heaven and the green of earth there. But there's certain greens, aren't they? There's certain blues. It's more than just that. It's more than just decoration. It's an emanated feeling from those colours. The energy, the vitality, the flow, the rhythm. He was particularly interested in music, and he paints a number of pictures of his family in the music room and things like that. So he's just trying to bring these different abstract ideas together. So flow, form, feeling, all united in an artwork, as well as attitudes about the time, the human form, the energy, the vitality. That's kind of giving it kind of context as well. It is stylized, and from our view now, it's kind of archetypal as well, you know, the way the figures are kind of looked. You see them, they're very traditional, and they're very European in their look, but he's trying to get that sense of connection and togetherness and reaching out for each other. But as you can see, they don't all entirely make it. There's a kind of gap there, so it's open to interpretation for that. And these are metaphysical ideas again about the world and our connection and coming together and then breaking apart and coming back together again. Multiple readings there, but just looking at it, it's got a tremendous energy, flow, and form. And then we talked about him using these interiors and the traditional still life, but in the background is that first version of the dance. He does this a number of times. He actually includes his bigger paintings in another painting that he'll make. It's a very clever device, really. If you've had a success with one painting and you make another one, let's link them up and let's advertise your old painting in your current painting. But you just talk about, it's an interesting way of talking about connection, space, and experience as well, because it's now kind of start combination of two artworks made at two particular different times, relatively close together. So you're compressing time as well as compressing all the other things that we just talked about within the image as well. Yeah, his use of color is really staggeringly beautiful at times and very engaging. These beautiful purple pinks with these yellows, of course, which are complementary colors, they just resonate beautifully. And pulling all these things together, it just really works. And then you put a surprising color in, sometimes like a red. That's got an earthy color, earthy red to it there, and underneath the canvas there. Like I said, when you've got lots of colors, sometimes it's good to have an earthy color in there. But the red, again, it lifts the whole picture. Sometimes you'll put just a kind of almost cadmium red in it, and that will really grab our attention. This is that red version of the dance now. See how it changes the mood completely? You know, we've still got the figures running around and they're dancing, and we've still got all that kind of primitive quality of that. But the atmosphere's changed now. There's something almost, I don't know, a little bit more foreboding about it. You know, there's the red energy of the forms, but now we're lost in a kind of almost semi-twilight or darkness in terms of the background colours. So this is exploring how colour can change our mood, how colour can have an influence on the feelings that we're experiencing from a painting. So with sensitivity, you kind of get to understand that, and you know, we discover in the visual language, we're understanding the qualities of how light hits certain colors, and how when you place one color against another, it enables one to resonate, or it makes one color look as if it's bigger than it actually is in your canvas, or smaller, things like that. It's fooling the eye. There's some very interesting work done by people like Joseph Albers, who was one of the teachers at the Bauhaus, whereby he shows that just by placing two different colors together, you can make, for example, a square seem to shrink or a circle seem to grow. And these artists were kind of all starting to be influenced by these elements of color theory. And then there's his red room, which is quite famous as well. It's an earthy kind of red. And as I said before, he's now linked it up with a lot of these different canvases, which he'd just been painting over the previous years. The simultaneous connection of the red of the walls and the floors and the tables, just lightly demarcated by these lines, design lines, although we still get this sense of perspective, hence the perspective on the table, certain perspective on the chair, slightly manipulated, going angle down from left to right there, left to right. He's manipulating that perspective, hence, like we talked about, Picasso did. But in this overall feeling of this earthy red, which is setting up a flavour and feeling, his other colours, his high resonance colours of his canvas, stand out like little jewels. And that was something which he was particularly fascinated with. This jewel-like quality. When he went over to Morocco, Marrakesh, places like that, he studied Islamic art, the tile art there, which would, the designs in the tile art and the beautiful placing of colours. And you get these beautiful Persian kind of mats and rugs that he's got there, with to help portray his family, just playing chess, which again is a combination of black and white in its design. It's tessellated, it's breaking up forms, it's linking up to his voluptuous painting that we saw earlier with the broken mark of pointillism, but he's kind of exploring these other kind of art forms and putting them together simultaneously. One of the reasons why he becomes so influential. He coalesces a number of these different art forms at this particular time, as well as giving this iconic image of his wife there. She's sometimes portrayed in this dark blue or black, and not that particularly happy with him as well. I think they had quite a volatile relationship at the time. She's not looking happy there, but she's keeping him in check. They had a long marriage, actually. And then you got these figures of the two boys there, just kind of in this deep red again. And this might be maybe his mistress, or this could be a family assistant. They did overlap at times as well. And he kind of captures their inner soul in their just simple gestures in their faces. And that's where the primitive art kind of has its power. This is a good example, North Africa, of appreciating the color blue. It's, we think of Africa as a very warm place. Often it is, of course, but this is a warm blue. It's incredible, almost like dichotomy, isn't it? Blue we think of as cool, but as you can see, if you get the right kind of cool, get the right kind of blue, there's subtle hints of red in that blue, as you can see in it, and that's enhanced by the reds of the other colours, the earthy warmness. And because it's just slight hints in the blue, what the eye does, it connects the two areas together. It's a lovely way of uniting a painting, but it's also a lovely way of lifting a quality of a colour. As you saw in his portrait of his wife early on, he was using clouds of colour, soft edges to the colour, this to move from one area to the other. If you also make those colour zones with hints of a different colour in it, say for example it is a blue, which is cold, and for identification we add a bit of warmth in that cloud, then when we put a stronger colour in our canvas, that lifts that cloud as well. So it pulls it along, if you like, it lifts it up. So you might want to think about how you kind of do that in your paintings, how you give one colour a G up from another stronger one that's not too far away from it. Okay? And this is an example of what he's done here. Also, by making it just about shapes and forms, it makes it easier for that impact to take shape. If he'd made it more three-dimensional and traditional, these colours, these shapes would have just been too heavy. They wouldn't have that cloud quality. They wouldn't have that softness, that possibility of moving so easily from one area to the other. He's not made them so too solid. Okay. This is another large painting. There's the conversation. Obviously, when we say conversation, he's implying a sort of tacit conversation that something is not 100% happy in. the Matisse household there. But there he is in his pajamas, and there she is in her black dress. It's the interesting portrayal of them that kind of tells us so much more about their relationship, isn't it? You know, the colours, of course, that gives us information. The fact that he's in these pajamas, which came from India, he liked wearing them so much, he used to paint in them in a warm climate, perfect bit of kit, no doubt, to wear. And we get an indication of where he is because he's looking out through the window with a trellis there, which he uses as a motif over and over for his South of France paintings. He takes the outside and brings it in again. As I said, this is what Hockney does with some of his portraits, particularly his double portraits. And all this adds information to the viewer, but it's kind of ambiguous, so there's multiple readings to it as well. Lovely little chair she sat on there, just hinted at holding her up. Again, lets our imagination fill in the blanks about the relationship between the two figures. But they do look like two monumental sculptures kind of engaging with each other there across a green distant, well, a view through from another vista, if you like. And we can read that as maybe a gap between the two figures has emerged. Okay. The other thing that influences his North Africa trips with these paintings of goldfish. Must have seen a number of them over there. Some iconic kind of imagery, and the colours, I suppose, are something which he would have been drawn to, the exoticness of them as well. Hence, he's placed them in a garden with flowers, the little jewels of the fish with the little jewels of the plant. So decoration, form, and design starts to come together. And the blue window, again, it's all about a specific colour blue, linking up everything, the forms and the designs, the iconic shapes, the curvilinear quality of the objects, the flattening of space, again, from inside and outside, linking, different shapes on different levels of perspectives. So all these things just turn it almost at times into an abstract picture. You've got that square there, you've got a circle, and you've got something which is more cylindrical. Now that's the influence he's got there is from Paul Cézanne, who of course tried to break everything down into those structural shapes. This thus giving it the picture certain kinds of dynamics. We've talked about how you move a viewer across your picture plane, whether you want the horizontal quality of stillness or a vertical monumentalness or a diagonal, which takes energetically from one place to the other. And then you've got this ellipse or circle, which unifies or unites an area as well. So he's using all those iconic shapes and forms in this kind of arena of blue, which, as we said, is about an emotional blue. It's about trying to connect with a spiritual feeling of the blue. And he's pulling all these things together so that we get these multiple readings. He's indicated flowers. He's indicated a certain level of perspective, as we said. So he hasn't jumped totally into abstraction, but he's pretty close there with this one. And then things change a little bit because this is during the First World War now, so there's hence something's a bit darker. He's still keeping his fish motif. He stayed in France during the war. Yeah, that's another story in terms of French resistance, etc., with his daughter. She was part of that, but he felt patriotic to stay there during the First and through the Second World War. Actually, it was in the Second World War that his daughter was part of the French resistance. But so there would have been a darker atmosphere in the land, if you like, over there at the time. So he starts to move and emphasize his blackness a little bit more. But we can see how his beautiful composition is held together there, how he leads the viewer down canvas, cross, back up and everything, with the central focus of the fish. But there's light through the window, there's optimism. But there's a careful study of the sunlight on that window at that side of that building in the background, and that becomes a key for the picture. So that beautiful pink, ochre pink again, is balanced up with a certain kind of powder blue. So it's warm and it's cool. Same with his greens, hint of that viridian green and a touch of the red, complementary but perfectly connected on the color wheel opposites. Then you've got this yellow and this green, which is interesting combination as well, but they're echoed around the picture. It's when you echo, you can jump it. So as soon as we look at this yellow green, part of our eye is also almost like subconsciously looking up this way as well to link up. That's one of the ways our perceptions work. We work through trying to piece together things quickly in our brain. So if we see one color, one part of the picture, almost simultaneously we're moving to the next part of that picture that's got that color. It's a way of moving the viewer around the composition of our painting. And of course Matisse does that really well. We talked about, yes, 1914. This is just a window in Collier, so he's down in the south of France. But yeah, we talked about that darkness of the atmosphere. He's taken it right down to, almost abstract blackness. This could be almost moving towards Rothko's late paintings of his color field pictures. There's just big, dark, blue-black shape, but we still get an interpretation that it is a window or it's a space into another realm, hence that spiritual aspect. These things moving through one thing into another. As you say, the window keeps reappearing for him. It's a lovely way of moving the viewer from one space to another, but it's also a wonderful way of moving our imagination from one space to another as well. It enables us to think big on many dimensions. So he's done it here. Another big, large canvas, so you get to step into this space. And then still 1916-17 war still going on, hence still fairly dark. Structure is still linear quality. The solidness of the line has kind of reappeared. And before the wars, you saw, and particularly when he was doing the Fauvist work, there was much more soft, cloudy effect. This is more delineated now. We see he always works between the cloudy, the structure, and the color and the design. And as we said, as we go later now, it becomes more design. Green and yellow is there again. Different cultures have different readings to these kind of colors. He was fascinated by even some of the colors from the East. We mentioned a reference to India. There's a Buddhist tradition as well. There's links there. These artists were also interested in Japanese art. We saw the Japanese influence in Van Gogh, people like that. They're different forms, different shapes, different qualities of their colors interpretations. This is, as I said, he's really emphasizing design. He's emphasizing the darkness to delineate areas, but he's also fascinated with this light. This resonant light, of course, is something which he develops as he moves from the last part of his life. But all the motifs are there. It's amazing how economical you can be in a painting, isn't it? By just using just a dark line and filling everything else, the whole area in with this beautiful, well-chosen blue to the left, almost like a big rectangle of color there, and then to the right, almost the blue again, all this area. And then that gives that opportunity for that shaft of light through the center, and in the center to shine through. And then through this kind of diaphanous curtain, we've got that landscape in the background, the tree of optimism, the tree of hope, the tree of renewal, the tree of regrowth. All right, there's no leaves on it at the moment, but there's greenery there. 1916, is something which is kind of inspiring to move forward with that. Portrait of his family, playing music. Look at that, how he's using a similar kind of motifs. We just looked at a green window with a bit green direct decoration in there. We see a classical form in the background, as we saw in one of the early pictures. So there's hope, there's optimism, always kind of trying to flow through into the picture. There's the joy of playing music, the abstract nature of music. He saw music as something which soothed the soul, particularly later in his life, and it becomes more and more important. He did a number of large murals for the ballet. He worked doing designs for the ballet and different theatre as well. All these things were qualities which were uplifting for the soul there. Another interior there in Nice in the south of France. Anyone's had the opportunity to go down there and see that beautiful blue in that sea and that sky and these wonderful French doors. So you can start to see the patterns and see the structures and see the overlapping motifs that he's using. A figure just sat out, iconic figure just sat out on that veranda, and it's kind of squashed the space again. He's turned the head of the table there, used as a decorative kind of form. He's taken motifs for the suggestion of the wallpaper from the Islamic art, tilations on the floor, of course, as well, Islamic, and just blending them all together again. But there's a kind of uplift about this picture now, and it was uplift and joy which became the theme then. This is a slightly later one now, Pink Mood. This is interesting because, we've seen Picasso's work and we've seen the way he kind of monumentalizes form. This is what's happening here. And you can see how this would have an influence on the British sculptor Henry Moore as well. Even Modigliani, the Italian painter, is another kind of reference who burned brightly in the 1920s. They kind of are taking that, African odalisque form, Middle Eastern odalisque form, and just elevating it to combine with extraordinary colours. Extraordinary colours there. The emphasis is on design, flat colours, structure, form, amazing yellow, which just seems almost out of blue in a picture like this, but it works because it's a yellow for a reason. It's almost got a golden quality to it. Takes your eye to stand for something like the sun or light force, particularly against the blue, which is something which a color has used been an artist for for centuries, which kind of suggests the heavenly dimension. So there's those kinds of qualities are being portrayed in it. There's a particular kind of Moroccan red there that you might see in Marrakesh, in their beautiful gardens, all kind of, so there's an element of the exotic as well, all overlaid in it. And then he starts to his later years now, ill health for the last 10 years or so of his life, and he started using collage and cutouts. These are large works, these are large murals, and because he couldn't really paint now, he would have assistants who would help him construct these large collages. He would take pieces of paper and he would get his assistants to paint them with gouache to a specific colour, and then they'd be attached to canvases. So he'd have certain themes, as you can see here. He liked sea themes, which he spent time in Tahiti, hence that certain blue. But now you're in that southern seas blue under the water, different kind of perspective altogether, different kind of spatial dimension. He's got a beautiful balance here where these sea creatures seem to float in front of these strong designs. Remember, a few slides ago, we looked at the chessboard, black and white chessboard. Here now you've got these two blues, but they're just the right colour blue to enable the off-whites to just float, to kind of give a universal support for that white to float above it, to give the impression that these creatures are in a vast ocean and they're able to move freely. Something which no doubt he wished he could have done. At this time he was in a wheelchair, so his imagination was big and able to fly and be free, which was the important thing. In this little later one, you can see that you've got these strong shapes again and same kind of colours, but there's sometimes a little more darkness comes in. That's maybe to do with, of course, the physical health he was in, but there's still that optimism and that beautiful plant tree coming through. So design, as we said, is much stronger towards the end. This is a piece of the scene of a very large picture, quite abstract, now, quite abstract forms. You can see these large cut-out pieces of paper being overlaid one on top of the other and then attached to these large canvases as you move through the piece on the left-hand side and then on the right-hand side as well. These iconic almost swirls of energy and suggestion of the different creatures that are swimming in his imagination under the sea. And then The Sorrows of the King. This is a self-portrait of him towards the end of his life. There was a famous Rembrandt picture of David playing a harp to Saul to soothe his soul, and he's used that as a kind of design motif, whereas this black figure is holding this kind of guitar or guitarra. It looks like a Portuguese almost guitar there, and he's just falling back into this other space now as this iconic figure on the right hand side, the iconic odalisque that we saw earlier. That's a female figure, Persian female figure, is on the right. He's falling further away from them. The energy force is maybe drifting out of him. But, you know, very large canvas again, beautifully constructed, wonderful combination of dark and light. Look at the main structured patterns in the background. These iconic colours are there, that pink purple, this heavenly blue and transformative blue to create atmosphere. These golden ribbons of, you know, the suggestion of leaves falling, autumn leaves coming down over the figure. Very simplistic, iconic kind of structure to indicate flowers or nature as well. Taking everything down, editing everything away to something which is very essential. All these things give it impact. And then it's one last series of blue nudes, just cutouts, as I said, of these. There we go. Cutouts of these large pieces of paper, painted in gouache, and then arranged in ways which creates a image of a figure moving through space, just slightly modifying them, each one as he puts it on the wall together. So there's just slight movement that they're iconic, but they're suggesting the whole of the form. And it's interesting to see, you know, when we're making paintings, and sometimes I say to you, let's work from the broad to the specific, large areas to something a bit more specific. It enables us to kind of get a balanced composition more easily. Here he's stripped away all the unnecessary. He's taken these large shapes and forms, and he's enabled them to have a monumental quality because of that. And this is one of the last ones, I think, in the slides. This is in a Tate, I think, in Britain, London. It's called the Snail. As you can see, it's got the kind of shell of the snail. Is there as the snail creeps along the floor there. This is, of course, being said right to the end of his life. So it's iconic and maybe of how he's feeling then. But these now abstract shapes just resonate in the white light of eternal space. That's the focus which holds the whole thing together in the center. And behind that, you've got these beautiful, iconic feelings of color. And they just kind of float, they resonate, they go behind us in places, and then they come towards us. We can see we moved on this kind of lovely diagonal curve to this red, and then we sink back, and then we sink back into that darkness that we saw in that window picture of 1914. And then we come down and we resonate into the eternal blue, this heavenly blue, and this natural green of a subtle lilac color, which takes us slowly through into the other dimension, into this, surrounded by this amazing orange, which any of you kind of think of Far Eastern imagery. I mentioned the Indian imagery, and I also meant the Buddhist art. The saffron robe of the Buddhist is on the outside there. Again, it's a transcendental color which lifts the spirit and mind to other dimensions. So he's surrounded this picture by that color to unite the whole piece. So there we go. There's an overall view of the famous Henri Matisse.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell notification.